Hello everyone. The spinal cord has two main functions in maintaining homeostasis, which is action potential propagation and integration of information. Therefore, in this presentation, we will be covering the second way the spinal cord promotes homeostasis, which is by serving as an integrating center for some reflexes. So let's get started. Now, a reflex can be defined as this fast, involuntary, very unplanned sequence of actions that will occur in response to a particular stimulus. Now, these reflexes, they can be classified according to their complexity. So they can be either monosynaptic or polysynaptic. Monosynaptic means that it's going to be a sensory neuron that will synapse directly on a motor neuron at the integration center. So there's no interneuron. And a polysynaptic is the opposite. So it will involve at least one interneuron between the sensory and the motor neuron. The next classification has to do with development. Therefore, it can be innate or learned. With regards to innate, those are the ones that you're born with, such as pulling your hand away from a hot surface before you even feel that that surface is hot. Other reflexes are learned or acquired. For instance, you may learn many reflexes while acquiring expertise on a specific function. So slamming on the brakes in an emergency is one of them. So you don't really think about it, but it's something that you learn when you started to drive. And of course, as you continue to drive, you get better at it. So that's why it's called a learned type of development. Next, we have effector. So effector can be either somatic or autonomic. Somatic, always skeletal muscle. Autonomic will be cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, or glands. And last, we have a classification according to the integration center. So where this information is integrated, analyzed. So it can be at the level of the spinal cord or at the level of the brain. If it's at the level of the brain, we call it a cranial integration center. Here, I'm just showing you the two examples according to the complexity. So it can be either monosynaptic or polysynaptic. Notice how on this first example over here, we only have one sensory neuron and one motor neuron. There's no interneuron at the level of the spinal cord. So that would be a monosynaptic. On the polysynaptic, represented here in red, we have an interneuron. So there's more than one synapse. There's two synapses in this case. Therefore, this is a polysynaptic reflex circuit. Action potentials, propagations into, through, and out of the central nervous system, they will follow a specific pathway depending on the type of information, depending on the origin, and depending on the destination. This pathway will be followed by action potentials that will produce a reflex, and this reflex is what we call a reflex arc or reflex circuit because it will always occur following these 5 steps. Let's start with step number 1. Step number 1 basically is going to occur at the sensory receptor, where the receptor will respond to a stimulus by producing a receptor potential. There are going to be many types of these sensory receptors. There are going to be stimulated by pressure. They can be stimulated by extreme temperatures, physical damage, or even exposure, for example, to chemicals. Then we have the step 2, which is the sensory neuron. So axons will conduct action potential from the receptor to the integrating center. And where is this integrating center? The integrating center is on the spinal cord. So the information from the sensory neuron will always arrive at the spinal cord, which again is part of the central nervous system. Therefore, step 3 is the integration center, which is going to be the region of the gray matter in the spinal cord that will process this sensory input. Then the information gets taken to a motor neuron, where the axons will conduct action potentials from the integrating center to the effector. And step 5 is the effector, which can be a muscle or a gland that will respond to the initial stimulus at the receptor site. So these are the 5 steps to a reflex arc. Now, one thing that can occur as well, for example, these are going to be pain receptors in the skin because they touched this pot that was hot, and the reflex occurs so fast that they were able to remove their hand from the pot. But we also have the pain receptors. And how is the pain receptor processed? Now, this pain information needs to be processed in the brain. So therefore, this first sensory receptor, which is this one right over here, will synapse with the interneuron at the level of the spinal cord and cause the reflex. But there's another neuron over here that will take this information all the way up to the brain. And the pain information is then processed in the brain. And then you go, oh my gosh, I burned my finger. So the reflex occurs faster than the sensation of pain, and mainly because the travel time is faster for a reflex than it is for the pain stimulus to go all the way to the brain, be processed, and then come down to your hand, and then you feel the pain sensation on the tip of your finger in this case. So this is why a reflex is important, because it lets your body react to certain harmful stimuli that might take longer if the information had to travel all the way up to the brain.